Hello there, this is Jake, and I wanted to make a quick video on abuse in the witness organization. I did some research on battered woman syndrome or battered spouse syndrome. You can find it online under that name, and it's truly sad what happens to women, and of course men are the victims of that as well. I wanted to relate this to the witnesses because I think it is very relatable. And I was having a text conversation with a person that is still a witness and semi-active, kind of what you'd call, they even admitted it, on the fringe. And something that I've noticed from a lot of witnesses that are, maybe just inactive but still believe, is that they consistently will say, oh, the organization has changed. The organization is different now than when it was when I left or when they had originally left. And I've even heard this from people that are real active, like pioneers. This really concerned me because it reminded me of the cycle of abuse that can happen in a relationship sometimes, and how detrimental it is to the abused victim. And this paper on Cornell about battered woman syndrome, or they also call it battered spouse syndrome, mentions that there's 3 phases that kind of instill this battered woman syndrome. The first is tension building phase, the second is acute battering incident, and the third is loving contrition. And I could kind of relate to the first one. It says buildup of minor abusive incidents, emotional threats, verbal outbursts, in which the woman is hypervigilant to her spouse's cues and changes her behavior accordingly. We could fill that in which the Jehovah's Witness is hypervigilant to the leadership's cues and changes their behavior accordingly. This obviously happens, right? I mean, whether the governing body is in a mood of control or relaxation, whether they print something that is really coming down on the membership or maybe a little bit more loving. I remember that would happen. It would change it would change my week depending on what was said at the circuit assembly. And then not just that, but also the local congregations, depending on how loving or non-loving the elders are. I mean, as much as an elder can really be loving, right? That it would change, your behavior would change accordingly. And I could see that from congregation to congregation. It was like almost people weren't their own persons. They were picking up on those cues from the leadership and then acting accordingly. The next stage was acute battering incident, severe or lethally violent battering incident. Now, obviously this doesn't, I'm sure it's happened maybe a couple times, but this isn't something that happens from leadership to Jehovah's Witnesses individually. But I viewed this as people that leave, or people that have problems with the organization, or people whose kids are disfellowshipped. This reminded me of when they have to make a hard decision, like whether or not to shun their kids, if they don't shun their kids, or if they decide to take a blood transfusion to save their lives, or employment that their watchtower doesn't approve of. They are treated severely. And they're treated severely, they're battered in the back room. They're treated severely or battered in front of other witnesses at the hall when they're publicly reproved. And I'm sure I could think of other ways they're battered emotionally, right? I remember, getting reproved, and I mean, you just feel horrible. I actually can't think of a worse feeling than being reproved when you actually are in the witnesses, you believe it 110%. I mean, you just feel like an absolute failure. So I can definitely see that. And the last one was loving contrition. This is the important one, right? Because my friend who said this and other friends or like acquaintances now, right? I don't really hang out with them. They wouldn't hang out with me since I'm disassociated. But loving contrition is explained as the batterer is remorseful and charming and promises never to harm the woman again. And I mean, oh my gosh, have we seen that, right? The Watchtower, you know, whether through speakers or through New Light or through, like I said, individual witnesses or through the elders, they say, oh, the organization has changed. The organization is different now. Come back to Jehovah. You wouldn't believe how loving it is. And, you know, they do this with chronology too. Oh, we made a mistake on that date, but, you know, here's the new date, or don't worry, we really have Jehovah's power of discernment now. You know, if you've been a witness for any amount of time, you've seen this. So this is something I had to get off my chest, because I think it's a real problem, the way they manipulate people. They abuse them, they manipulate them, they abuse them, they manipulate them. And you never, at least in the witnesses, I mean, I was, you know, happy in my younger years, but when I got to an actual reasoning, critical thinking stage, you become miserable because you never, this dream that they give you never comes to fruition. In other words, you study enough, it's almost like you're going to be perfect or semi-perfect, you know, like if you study enough, have your family study, you know, everything's just going to go great. And that never comes to fruition. And again, they sell that they've changed, that the organization's more loving. So, oh, if you've been a dissociated or disfellowship, come on back, you know, come on back and try. Again, you know, we promise we won't abuse you this time. So, thanks for watching. Let me know what you think.